What's up, my ninjas? Dart Frog Ninja here, coming at you like a shuriken. Welcome to the first episode of my new discussion show called The Dart Discussion. Look at those fancy graphics. Ooh. In this episode, we're going to talk about leaf litter and moss. Which is better? Which should you use? Which do I use? And why? Now guys, let's get hoppin'. Entering the ring, we have the champion of top layer substrate for Dart Frog hobbyists, leaf litter. Now, about 90% of all Dart Frog hobbyists, myself included, we use leaf litter as our top layer of substrate. I'm going to go over some pros, some cons, and I'm going to explain to you which leaf litters I have here, what they are, what I use them for, what other hobbyists use them for. So let's get started with the pros. Now, this provides places to hunt and hide for your frogs, and now in the rainforest even, most species of darts spend their time on the forest floor. Now, leaf litter provides a level of security for your frogs in captivity. That extra security for your frogs may help them with being more visible out, so you get to see them more out in the open. It can also help with the stress level of your frogs, and can help alleviate aggression between tank mates, as this creates extra places to hunt and hide for them. Now, the second pro I want to talk about is actually leaf litter is food for your microfauna, as well as a place to hide and breed for them. Now, as leaf litter breaks down, it helps create new soil, and your microfauna is going to help that process along. Number 3, we have possible breeding spots for your frogs. You don't have a cocoa hut? No problem. Some dart frogs, if you don't have a cocoa hut, or even if you do, on the larger flat leaves, they will lay their eggs on them. So then you'll have an actual natural breeding spot for them. And some dart frogs actually hide their eggs in the leaf litter itself. So there's always that possibility. Now, number 4. Leaf litter provides food for your plants. Now, while these break down, like I said, it creates soil, and it has nutrients that it puts into the soil. So it's actually like a natural fertilizer. That's what happens in the wild. When leaf litter breaks down, you get these nutrients, gets put into the soil, the plants, they eat it up, and it helps them grow and thrive. Number 5, decaying leaf litter, it replenishes soils, and it replenishes nutrients and compounds in the soil, such as carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen levels. This helps keep the soil's health and can foster life such as beneficial bacteria and fungi. Tannins are released from leaf litter as it breaks down, and that actually helps against the harmful growth of bacteria that you don't want in your vivarium. Now, number 6, the final pro is this actually helps add humidity and moisture levels to your vivarium, and it helps regulate temperatures on the ground as well. So keeping dart frogs, you want your tank, your vivarium, if you will, you want it to be humid. You want it to be nice and moist in there because they're amphibians. You don't want them to dry out. And leaf litter actually helps maintain some of that. So there you have it for the pros. Let's go over the cons. There aren't very many. And here we go. Number 1 for the leaf litter con. It has to be replaced as it breaks down. Yes, leaf litter is great, but one of the major issues with it is as it breaks down over time, you have to replace it. You have to constantly put new leaf litter in. That could be anywhere depending on how your microfauna levels, how humid, the temperature in your vivarium. It could be, anywhere from like 3 to 4 weeks to maybe every 3 months or so that you might have to add some new layer of leaf litter in. The last one, it's kind of a double-edged sword because I touched on it in the pros, but it does create the extra soil, and as it does create the extra soil and it breaks down, if you don't replenish it, that soil is going to stick to your dart skin, and your dart frogs are going to appear dirty. They're going to have the dirt particles, the broken down leaf particles on them, and generally dart frogs don't like having stuff on their skin. Their skin is pretty much permeable, so they do breathe through it. They do drink their water through their skin. So having dirt and other debris on it, they kind of just don't like that. So that is the last con for leaf litter. like I said, not very many cons for that. And right now, I guess we will go over the types of leaf litter I have in front of you. The types you're seeing right now, I'll go over each individual type, and I'll tell you how I use them, how they're used in the hobby, and all that good stuff. So let's get to that. First up, we've got this delightful live oak leaf litter. Now, live oak leaf litter, this is probably one of the main leaf litters used in the hobby. It is used as a top substrate for your darts, especially smaller darts. They're going to like this, and then your juvenile darts, because they can go in and between, underneath the leaves. There's going to be a lot of microfauna going to be eating up on these. You're going to find your springtails and your isopods munching on these, and that provides hunting for your dart frogs. So this actually has multiple uses. It's great. I recommend it. I have a huge bag of it. This is just a sample for the video. Next up, probably the next most popular leaf litter is magnolia. Now, magnolia leaves, this is good for larger frogs. It covers a really good amount of surface area in your vivarium, so you don't have to use quite as many. You can snap it in half, you can break them, and use parts. Unfortunately for me, I have a giant magnolia tree outside my house, so I am able to actually go collect them, clean them, and sterilize them. And that actually might be next week's dart discussion. I might take you guys out, collect some leaf litter, show you how to clean it and sterilize it, or at least how I do it, because there's several ways to do it. And that way you guys get a kind of a glimpse at how to collect your own leaf litter. But magnolia leaves, these are great. You might have them in your in where you live, because they can survive in a lot of different climates. They're not just tropical trees. The one I have has been here as long as I've been here around, probably longer. So it is giant. It is a massive tree, and like I said, if I go out and do that, I'll show you guys. But magnolia leaf litter, it's great. Also, darts may lay their eggs on or underneath these guys, because it's such a large flat surface area. So there's that. Next up, one of my personal favorites. This, guys, this giant leaf right here is a sea grape leaf. Now, these guys come from sea grape trees. The good thing about them is, again, they take up a lot of surface area. They're really, for the most part, pretty flat. So this is, again, another great place for dart frogs to lay their eggs. Also, the good thing about these guys, I touched on it in the pros, as this breaks down, this releases some great tannins, some great chemicals and compounds that are great against fighting bacteria that are harmful for your frogs, and other things like that, and it's good for their skin. So this is one of those leaves that, if you have a big enough enclosure and you have enough ground space, I recommend putting in a couple of these guys and having them on top of maybe your oak leaves or with your magnolias, because this is a great sitting spot for your frogs, and it is really awesome for their skin. Cannot stress enough how great these are. This is probably my favorite go-to leaf. I wish I had one of these trees in my yard, but I don't. So all I have is magnolia, and I do have some oak, but I don't like the oak that I have, so I buy that. But sea grape leaves, guys, great stuff. On to the next. Alright, this doesn't look like much, guys, but this is an Indian almond leaf from the Indian almond tree. Now, this really isn't used very much inside of your vivarium, but what it is used for, it's used for rearing tadpoles. Now, guys, what you would do with a tadpole, if you're going to raise them yourselves, and you put them in whatever container you have them in, usually you keep most dart frog species separate. There are some species like my guys, the Phyllobates terribilis, they can actually be kept in groups. But what you do is you place them in a container, you place a little bit of this leaf litter, you can break off a piece, this almond, you throw it in there. And you throw it in there usually typically with some java moss. Now, this provides the tadpole with some shelter, and as it sits in that water, the tannins leak out of this. And again, this is another one of those leaves where the tannins of the leaf are actually very good for your tadpole's development. It's good, it fights against bacterial infections, and then they can actually munch on this a little bit as well. So this is a awesome leaf, and if you have if you're going to raise tadpoles, if you think you're going to raise tadpoles, get yourself some Indian almond leaves. You're going to need them because it creates a thing called tadpole tea, guys. Tadpole tea. That's right. It's basically just the water. It looks like sweet tea. It's kind of light. So it looks, to the naked eye, it looked like dirty water, but it's not. It turns that teaish color because that's the tannins and chemicals leaking from this leaf, which is very beneficial, again, for your frogs. So Indian almond leaves, great stuff. Now next I'm going to talk about one of the newer additions to the leaf litter hobby. I only have one leaf left because I just checked. I used it all. This is a maple leaf. Maple leaves are really good. Again, they're like oak leaves, and I would use them for smaller darts. They do break down fast, but it adds different look to your vivarium floor, which is pretty cool. Maple leaves are starting to become a little bit more popular. There's a few guys I know of who sell these. There's not too many, but that's okay. Alright, and some more leaf litter that I don't have pictured and I have not used. We've got willow leaves, you've got catappa leaves, guava leaves, and loquat leaves. All these leaves are more tropical, except for the willow. They're leaves you would find kind of in the rainforest. So if you want a more natural looking forest floor kind of look for your vivarium, for your dart frogs, I would recommend hitting up a place like Tannin Aquatics. They sell a lot of the tropical leaves, like I mentioned, like the catappa, which is one of the leaves I actually really want to work with, so I might order some in the near future, and we'll see how that goes. And they are beautiful, guys. If I had them, I would show them to you, and you would just fall in love with them because they do look like something you'd pull straight from the rainforest floor. Now, those are the leaf litter types I have. And like I said, those are personal use. I talked about my personal usage with them. I love leaf litter. I think it's great. I think that if you're a dart frogger, you should probably use some of your floor space with leaf litter. It doesn't have to be the whole floor space, but in my experience, it helps the frogs. They like it. My frogs that I have now, they're a little indifferent with it. They sit on it. They like the mostly they like the sea grape leaves and the magnolia leaves because that's just a place for them to sit on. The smaller ones like the live oak, they kind of don't like them that much because they kind of stick to them and they're kind of unsettled. They're big frogs, so when they jump around and move around, they kick them up and it kind of freaks them out. So personally, for my frogs, I use the oak leaves as a top base layer. And then I'll put on top of the oak leaves my magnolia and my sea grape. And then they seem to like that. So in my biopod now, if you've been paying attention, you can see that I do in my leaf layer side of my biopod that I do have magnolia and the sea grape as my top layer. And then the oak leaves are the base, and that's good for my microfauna because it breaks down faster. They're able to eat that quicker. And it's good for the plants as well. So there you have it for leaf litter. Next up, we're going to talk about moss. Entering the ring, the challenger for top layer substrate, moss. Now guys, moss is kind of a newer top layer substrate. It's been used in the hobby in various different ways. There's various different kinds of moss that are used in various ways. Right now I have 3 of the most popular in front of us. I'll talk about a few others and how they're used. But right now I'd say maybe about 10% of dart frog hobbyists use this as their top layer of substrate, or any combination, one or just one type of the moss as a top layer substrate, and they forego leaf litter. Now there's some pros and cons, and we're going to go over that. We're going to talk about how I use them, and we're going to talk about the types of moss I have in front of you, how I've used them, what they're used for, and we'll get a final verdict. So, without further ado, let's go over some pros. Now for moss, we have some pros. The first one is it helps add to humidity and can provide cooler temperature spots for your frogs. Yes, guys, moss retains a lot of water, so when it mists, it sucks up that water like a sponge, if you will, and it's going to be a nice cooler area for your frogs to sit. So let's say you have a side of your tank that is kind of open and there's not a lot of either plant cover, there's no leaf litter. You can have a side there where there's moss, and that will provide a place for them to go that's a little bit cooler, for them to sit on, that's a little bit moist. You don't want it soaking, because if it soaks it's going to rot and it's going to die, because guys, moss is a plant. It'll die if you overwater it, it'll die if you underwater it. There's a nice balance you have to have there. 2, the second pro, it helps filter water and nutrients in the substrate. Like I said, it does soak up water like a sponge, and it filters that water for itself because it is a plant, so it does drink that water, and it filters it, and it goes through, then the extra water passes through, and it passes through the substrate, and that filtered water is, well, let's say it's a little bit cleaner, it's a little bit better, and your substrate's going to get a little bit fresher water, which, you know, in nature that's more of a thing than it is in your vivarium, but it's still, I believe, a pro for your vivarium. Number 3, your microfauna. They're going to eat the dying moss. Your springtails are going to live in that. Springtails love high humidity, guys, and you're not going to find much higher humidity substrate than your moss, because it does retain the water. Now, today I was actually in my vivarium and I was checking out my moss, and I was kind of poking around, and as I was poking around in the sheet moss, I found that my springtails were just popping up out of it. Like, I didn't even know they were there. They were there just kind of chilling for the day. They were probably eating any kind of mold, bacteria, anything decaying. They were just there, and that was kind of cool. I didn't know that they were spending most of their time there, which is really neat. So it is beneficial for your microfauna. Number 4, moss just looks cool, guys. Let's face it. If you want that jungle, that rainforest vibe going for your vivarium, moss is just awesome. It looks great. It's appealing to the eye. It's catchy, and it kind of gives that prehistoric look, because moss is one of the oldest plant types since the dinosaur days. Much like ferns, true ferns I should say, they haven't really changed very much. So if you want to go for that vibe, it is great to have. Now, number 5, I kind of touched on a little bit in number 1, but it also provides a clean place for your frogs to sit and hunt. Now, I talked about in leaf litter, one of the cons was that gets the debris stuck to their skin as the leaf litter breaks down. With moss, it doesn't really break down like that. If it does break down, it just dies like a plant would, and it doesn't really stick to their skin. So they can sit on the moss, and they won't have anything to worry about. There's not going to be any particles stuck to them, no debris, and they can also hunt there, which is a good open spot. Let's say if you have crickets, if you're feeding larger dart frog crickets, crickets love to hide, guys. Leaf litter is like one of their favorite spots. They'll bolt in there, and then your dart frogs have to hunt around in the leaf litter for them. Now, if you have some moss, there's nowhere really for them to go. They kind of are gonna they might be thirsty from being packaged up, the crickets that is, so they might stay in the moss area, and they're going to be out in the open. Your dart frogs will be able to pick them off quicker. That same goes for fruit flies as well, and worms. If you feed any type of worms to your frogs, it's easier for them to grab because it's sitting right out in the open for them. Now, number 6, moss, it's going to grow and expand. What I mean by that is, again, I've touched on it, moss is a plant, guys. It doesn't have any kind of root structure, but it has rhizomes on the bottom, and I'll kind of flip that over and we'll show you here what I'm talking about. Let's see. You see, guys, these brown part, my thumb is, that isn't roots. Those are rhizomes. And rhizomes basically kind of anchor it to whatever you put it. You could put it in on a wood, you can put it on rock, you can put it directly into the substrate, and it's going to anchor itself there, and that's how it kind of soaks up nutrients and grows. And the great thing about moss, like I said, is it is going to spread as it grows. In my vivarium now, the sheet moss and the pillow moss, they're starting to spread. They're starting to spread onto the cork wood, and they're starting to spread across the vivarium floor, which is what I intended and what I like. So there you have it for the pros of moss. Now let's go to the cons. There's only maybe one extra con more than leaf litter, but here we go. For the first con I have down is that it doesn't provide any kind of hiding spot or visual barriers for your frogs. Again, guys, your frogs spend most of their time in the forest floor, in the rainforest, in the wild, and that rainforest is mostly covered with leaf litter from all the trees. Moss is there in the rainforest, but in the vivarium it's not going to provide any kind of visual barrier or any kind of place for them to hide. It is pretty much flat unless you have some kind of really long strand growing type of moss. They have nowhere to hide. They're kind of out in the open. So that can be a con, because that is might affect your frogs' feeling of security, and they might not sit out in the open if they feel like they don't have a place to bolt to hide when you come around. Now, number two, moss can be a little tricky to grow. Number 2 and 3 touch on this subject, but the first one we're going to go over, you have to have the proper lighting for it to survive. You have to have nice bright light. I believe it's 6500K lumen. I'm not really good with the kind of specs like that, but I believe it's something like that at least for your moss to grow. If you don't have that kind, or it's blocked out, your moss is going to eventually turn brown and it's going to die, and it doesn't look good. It just looks like a mess. I know, because I've been there. And then number 3, some mosses need proper airflow in order for it to thrive. So if you have a stagnant vivarium, let's say you've covered all your ventilation because you're having problems with humidity, there's no way for fresh air to get into that vivarium at all, or you don't have any kind of fan system to cycle in air, eventually your moss is going to become waterlogged. It's going to turn brown, it's going to get nasty and soaked, and it might stink. There's been cases where people have had their moss give off a kind of a foul odor and then they removed it. I have not had that problem, but it could turn brown and it just doesn't look good. So then your moss is dead, and that's it. So those are pretty much the cons for moss. Now I'm going to talk to you right now about the types of moss I have on camera. They're the ones that I've used, the ones I'm currently using, and we're going to go over just how well they do and what you need to get them in order to thrive. So first up, we're going to probably talk about one of the most important mosses, probably one that's not exactly as glamorous as some of the other mosses. We're going to talk about sphagnum moss. Alright guys, this is dried sphagnum moss. Now, you can use this for various different things. Most dart frog hobbyists use this as a layer above your substrate. So you're going to put your ABG mix down, and then you're going to get this wet, not soaking. You don't want it dripping because that's too much. You can wring it out if you get it too wet. You just get it wet, and then what I like to do is I'll get it wet, and then I'll kind of just wring it out like a sponge, and then I will, it'll be wet, but it won't be dripping, and then I'll add it as the top layer on top of my ABG mix substrate. This keeps humidity in your tank good, and it also keeps frogs from making the direct contact with the ABG mix and getting debris and dirt stuck to their skin. Again, like I said, dart frogs do not like that, so if you can avoid that, that's great. You can also use this to pack your back walls, your custom walls, your cork bark, and it's also used for different bromeliads, for orchids. You wrap them around the base of the roots, usually with fishing line or plant clips, and then this keeps it nice and moist. The roots nice and moist, and it keeps things humid in there for it. I use it for the various things I've talked about, and it works great. And the great thing is that if it gets the proper lighting, the proper amount of water, and the humidity is great, this comes to life actually, guys. It doesn't stay brown and gross looking. It'll actually start to turn green, and you'll get new growth. And if you've been watching my biopod episodes, you've been seeing that I've been getting a lot of growth out of this dried sphagnum moss here, so that's cool. Alright, next up, we have sheet moss. Sheet moss, guys. This stuff is typically used for a top layer of your substrate. This right here is dried sheet moss. You can get it dry, or you can get it live. I have both. I've had better success with live sheet moss than I have with dry sheet moss. But basically what you do with dried sheet moss is you take this, you soak it in some water typically RO, distilled spring water. You don't want to use chlorinated. If you use chlorinated, you're going to kill it. Never use chlorinated water in the dart frog hobby at all for anything. I would never use it. There's some people who the water has chlorine in it and it's cleaner, depending, I guess, whatever city or town they live in. That's cool for them, but generally use RO water, distilled water, or spring water. You can buy that bottled. You can make RO water if you have an RO system yourself. I use distilled, haven't had any problems. My plants love it, my frogs love it, we're great. But I digress. Sheet moss, again, uses a top layer substrate. This stuff gets green, it grows, and it will spread and cover your ground, and it creeps up on bark and rocks, any kind of structures you have, and it's currently doing that in my vivarium. I like it. Like I said, it helps retain humidity, and it's a nice flat surface for them to sit on and hunt on, and then my microfauna love it because my springtails will hide up in this and they'll munch on the dead decaying stuff in there, and they just kind of love it because the humidity is really high. So there's that. Next up, one of my favorites. This, guys, is pillow moss, aka mood moss, aka frog moss. Now, why is it called pillow moss, frog moss? Well, guys, this particular moss is very feathery. If you can see that, it's very feathery. Love that texture. And it grows in mounds, kind of like a pillow, or even a frog shape, if you will. So that's where it gets its name. This stuff is great. It's used as a top layer of substrate again, and it will spread and grow. Because it is a plant, they don't produce any kind of fruit or flowers. They do produce spores, kind of like almost like a mushroom. And these spores pop up, and they rely on wind and any kind of air circulation to kind of blow them around, and that's how it kind of finds its spot, and it spreads and it grows in new places. So there you have pillow moss. One of the best mosses, I think, in my opinion, to use because it's really cool looking, very soft, and it grows kind of tall, and it's very feathery. So I like that. There's pillow moss. Now, other types of moss we have in the hobby, guys. We have Riccia moss or Ricca moss, and that grows mostly on anything. You just got to keep it wet. You can grow it on rocks. You can grow it on bark. You can grow it on cork. You can probably even get away with growing it on your glass. If you keep it wet and you keep it humid and you have the right lighting, Riccia moss or Riccia moss, I don't know how you pronounce it, guys. I've never worked with it. That'll grow on just about anything. I've seen some great setups where it looks like a jungle with that. So that's one of the more popular versions that they have out there. We also have Java moss. I've worked with Java moss a little bit. I don't have any right now. Java moss can be used for various things. The most important usage I find is for tadpoles. Now, we went over Indian almond leaves and using them with tadpoles, but what you do is you throw a little bit of Java moss in there as well, and that actually adds to the water, and it also helps your tadpole as far as they can munch on that a little bit, and adds another level of security, something for them to hide in a little bit. You just need a little bit, but you throw that in there, and it's a great moss. It's an aquatic moss, but you can also grow it terrestrially. You just have to keep it very wet. The lighting has to be right, and it has to be very humid. And that's another one of those mosses that can grow on just about anything. And I think I'm going to actually start to work with that a little bit more and incorporate that more with my setup. So I'm probably going to try and see if I can acquire some maybe tomorrow and see if I can put it on some of the wood features that I have in my vivarium, and just see how that works out. So there you have it. That's some moss in a nutshell for you. I've tried working with moss in the past. Usually I have bad luck with it because either I don't have the proper lighting or I don't have airflow, and it just kind of eventually, it looks great at first and then it turns brown, and then it's just, you know, food for microfauna, and then I cover it up with leaf litter. Now that I have the biopod, I actually have all three of the moss that you see in front of you. All three of these guys, they all are thriving. They're all growing. They're spreading. I love it. The humidity is right. The lighting is right, and there is airflow built into the biopod. So this is not a shot. This is not a product placement kind of ad for biopod. Just saying, I've had no luck with moss before, and now I have a biopod. I have 3 different types growing, and I'm going to try and go for 4. So we'll see how that goes. So there you have it. There's moss in a nutshell. Alright guys, I'm going to finish up. As you can see, I use both. Now, I used to be primarily a leaf litter guy because I didn't have any luck with my moss. But because now I have this new biopod and it has everything I need, we have pillow moss growing great. We've got your sheet moss growing. And then look at that. We have, that is actually the sphagnum moss. And it's starting to grow, which is crazy. I never thought it would grow like that, but it does. And then my back wall is turning all green. So moss is there. I got my leaf litter. I've got my magnolia. You can see on top of that the cocoa hut. Underneath the cocoa hut there is a sea grape leaf. And then I've got a small layer of oak leaves mixed in as well. So guys, the question is, can you use both? Should you use one or the other? Again, the lines in the sand, basically there's 90% of the dart frog hobbyists use leaf litter as their base, as their top substrate layer. And then there's a small percentage of people who don't use it and just use moss. I'm not going to tell you which one you shouldn't use. I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't use leaf litter, you shouldn't use moss. I am going to say that you can use both. And I'm a strong believer that you can use both. And you should use both. You can mix it up how you want to do it. Right now I probably have the base of this. It's probably almost 50-50. I have that my moss side right here. I've got my leaf litter side. It stretches to that back corner. It stretches back behind the fern, so there's leaf litter there. And then, like I said, I have my moss section right here. So you can use both, guys, and you can be successful. You can use one or the other, and honestly, I think you can be successful. If you were going to use one or the other, honestly, I endorse leaf litter. If you don't want to mess with moss, leaf litter is definitely the go-to top layer substrate. Again, if you're going to use just one, you don't want to do one or the other, you want to pick one, I endorse leaf litter because of all the pros I said it had and a few cons. Now, there are people who don't use that and do use just moss, and they've had great success, and that's great. That's good for them. I'm not going to say that's wrong, because it's not. Obviously, if they're doing great, if your frogs are thriving on it, then that's awesome. So you can use that. But again, if you had to pick one or the other, leaf litter wins every time, because there's more pros and less cons. But I still love moss. So there you have it for my first discussion, guys. Thank you for watching. Check back next week for the next episode of the Dart Discussion. It could possibly be me showing you how to collect leaf litter from your own yards, how to clean it, and how to sterilize it. So that might be the next Dart Discussion topic. Now guys, check out my Instagram page. I'm going to share the link in the description below, and you're going to see more pictures and behind the scenes looks at my lives. I am a nerd. I do other things besides frogging. I like video games, going out and hiking, nature, stuff like that. So definitely take a look at that. And then please like and subscribe my channel for more videos. And thank you for your continued support, guys. This is Dart Frog Ninja saying frog on.